Allô. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. On est ravis aujourd'hui de vous présenter le Work in Progress de la série L'île aux 30 cercueils, l'adaptation de Maurice Leblanc, bien sûr. Et on a le bonheur d'accueillir...
So, welcome to you all, and we're fortunate enough here to have Elsa Marpeau, who's a screenwriter, Stéphane Moiti, who's an executive producer, all the way to my right, and to my left, Florent Meyer, who's also a screenwriter, and then we have the director of this show. So I think principal photography ended just a few days ago. And we're very lucky to have them with us today. We begged them for a few pictures. We thought it would be better if we could have a few rushes. Let me know that there's no SFX, there's no calibration. It's all going to be pretty raw in terms of format, no color grading, nothing of that sort. But it will probably help us to discuss that, because it's really going to be it's the direction that's original. So let's watch a few pictures and have a look after that. Thanks for your introduction. Go ahead. No, just to tell you that this teaser that you're about to see is also a temporary work in progress teaser, because it was just made with part of our rushes, but there will be another teaser. Thanks for that.
Dusted off my soul, melted ice so cold.
Quand t'es revenu sur l'île, j'ai eu peur. Je voulais plus que tu repartes.
Ils sont partout, seuls du mal.
Qui?
You shook me.
Ça, c'est le premier signe. La prophétie se réveille.
Knock, c'est de la folie. La mort est revenue. 30 cadavres, 30 cercueils.
J'irai jusqu'au bout. Je t'en fais la promesse.
Voilà, comme ça, vous êtes dans l'ambiance un peu.
So that gives you an idea of the atmosphere of the show. My first question would be, according to our discussions, was something. It was the producers who wanted to do this. So could you tell us why you wanted to do this? Why it was your idea to try and do this, to pick up from this old story, because it's an adaptation of Maurice Leblanc's book, but there was also a kind of legendary TV show that was made in the past about this in the 70s. And how does today's outlook modify the manner in which you get to tell this tale? Because, of course, these are different times. Basically, it was more of a common desire with Elsa Marpeau and Florent Meyer and France Télévisions. We'd worked on a collection a few years back, a collection called Mystère à Paris, and with France Télévisions we thought we should move on to something new. And France Télévisions, in fact, for a long time had wanted to work on that. So we talked about it together. We started reading Maurice Leblanc's novel, and we thought, wow, pretty tough. And then we watched the iconic series from the 70s. It's hard to touch something iconic. And that's where all of the screenwriters' creativity really made us want to go there. I think the first point was to try to avoid a remake of what had already been done. We wanted to modernize it. And then, of course, in Maurice Leblanc's novel, there are quite a few things that were very attractive. First of all, there's the story of Christine, the female hero, the heroine, mystery, a prophecy that said a lot about people's beliefs, so we had to bring back this idea of beliefs, and then a kind of a community of island dwellers with their own rules, like a kind of little family, and then based on that, that's what screenwriters do. They need to come along and say, okay, this is where we'd like this to go. And to be honest, there are things that we thought were a little bit aged, or at least that we felt were not very interesting. But there were other very powerful elements. Think of Maurice Leblanc. Wrote this book in 1919, I think, just after World War One, and that wasn't by chance, of course, because it's also a major turning point in the place of women in society and so on, and that's why we have Christine, who is struggling against her father's will, her husband's will, and who finds emancipation there. So a very powerful character. But it was also a fantastic opportunity to go into that genre. So we'll tell you how we defined the genre, how we approached it. But there really was a common will, a common desire. And then I was very keen to work with Florent, and this was a fantastic opportunity to do that. Thanks a lot. I would like to welcome François Iter, who's here, semi-virtually, but at least he's here in spirit. Absolutely. So as it started from a kind of common desire of the producer, the broadcaster, and the screenwriters, I know that you did not originate the project. It was more like Sophie Exbrayan that you picked up from her. But what might be interesting would be to discuss the manner in which, from time to time, when there are discussions between writers and broadcasters and producers, help to identify kind of common desires. Maybe it works slightly differently, because it's usually screenwriters, producers develop projects and go and bring them and go and present them to the broadcaster. And why would you say that France Télévisions was very keen to work particularly on that novel and that story, particularly now? I think there's something very powerful in The Island of the 30 Coffins, because when we were kids or teenagers, it's something we all have as a kind of memory in common of the first sort of scary television. And I think it's probably one of the great monuments. Belphégor was a show. I wasn't born. And then there was La Poupée Sanglante, and then there was L'Île aux 30 Cercueils. And if you talk about it around you and say, I'm working on an adaptation, I'm supporting that, I'm in support of that, all of the memories come back from childhood of how scared they were, and the fright and the pleasure of that fright as kids. So it's true that we worked hand in hand there, and that does create the opportunity to revisit our heritage, and again in collaborations we're in fact extended families in this sector. Stéphane was someone I had the great pleasure of partnering with for Le Mensonge, a mini-series that we worked on together. I'd never worked with Elsa, but I have great admiration for her work, and Frédéric and Florent. We made 2 seasons of Zone Blanche together, and I think all of that creates bonds, and I think when you have a successful adventure together, it calls for other adventures. And I also never forget that all of the people who are on set, I think everything that connects us and binds us is our love of stories and our desire to tell these stories. I'm trying to be a demagogue or anything, but I really do think that there's a bond there that exists, and that's where the desire comes from, basically, I would say. Basically, I freaked out as a kid when I watched that series, I'm told about that. It's an adventure. We seem to be moving. We're working on archetypes, but there's also a very rare opportunity to tip into a kind of a strange anxiety. And then we thought, okay, let's do this. Well, you did it, and apparently it seems to have went well. Perhaps before we listen to the screenwriters, maybe another question about the origins. Was the Lupin, the Netflix Lupin thing, had that already started when you embarked on this adaptation of Maurice Leblanc, who also wrote Lupin? Or it's not so much the Maurice Leblanc book, not so much the Maurice Leblanc book than the very strong memory of L'Îlot du Cercueil, which was one of the scariest TV shows that we got to watch as kids. What was the trigger? Well, when we started thinking about the adaptation, Lupin hadn't been released. We knew it was under development, but the global success of Lupin was a bit of a surprise. Because it put Maurice Leblanc back on the map. So it was a good thing for us, and are in fact going to probably republish the original work so that they can look at the original text and compare it. We knew that Lupin was going to emerge. It's a project that had its ups and downs, but it's more the kind of world of Maurice Leblanc and this Proust Madeleine, the Proust's cake memory. And when you're working with icons from the past, you need to be very careful and tread lightly. And that's where all of the adaptation work and the writing, and then of course there are leitmotifs that you need to respect when working on that. But Lupin's success happened while work was still in progress, and in fact strengthened our determination. So as a screenwriter, when you find something that has already been made in a TV format as a TV series, and that left its mark on an entire generation, how do you feel? Do you feel any duty to do something? Do you feel that you cannot do things? Elsa, I think you didn't watch it, but you, Florent, you did the original series. How do you work around that? Is it not too intimidating? How do you know where you belong? How do you find your place working with these motifs? So Florent and I are not going to say the same thing, because Florent watched it and I've never seen it. It's not that I watched it again. In fact, we didn't have the telly when I was a kid. I wasn't allowed to watch TV, so I have absolutely no notion of that. But it's when we talked about it to people when we were writing that everyone seemed to have seen it. But then, too bad we'd already started writing. And then basically the first thing was to read the book. And I'm sorry, but the book itself is really not that bad. There are some very strong bits in there. The crucifixion, a couple of key moments that you can see in the teaser there. But for those of you who haven't read it, so the heroine is on this quest for her son who's vanished. She ends up in a terrible mess, and then she dies and everything. And then 30 pages before the end, Arsène Lupin arrives and delivers her. I mean, no one's talked about Arsène Lupin. It's the Deus Ex Machina. So as a reader, you think, oh God, that's really bad. Surely we can do better than that. So of course, it's probably easier to do adaptations of books that aren't that good. And this one is quite, to be honest, not that good. So I felt really comfortable. I didn't feel that adapting it was too much of a burden. Let me correct that. I didn't actually see this series in '79. I saw a few pictures, but I think we all Okay, we said, okay, we can read the book, but let's not watch the original show because we really did not want to repeat things that had already been seen, and we wanted our own imagination to take over. I think the word there, the key word there is the motif, the pattern. What we identified in the book are patterns, the sort of duality, the mother's quest, the criminal son, all of these are motifs there. Finding the son and the son's a criminal, and all of that is something. These are patterns, motifs that we try to identify, and based on references we had in common, which also brings me back to what we said initially. The good thing is that we had already worked together, that we have a lot in common in the way in which we work with Sophie Exbaria and then with François. And that was in fact fantastic and gave us a lot of freedom. And in my experience as a screenwriter, it was really a true collaborative experience, including with the director, because he was involved in the project very early on. And I would really like to say that as a screenwriter, it was really a great pleasure to work in these conditions, because the writing was quick and everyone was in agreement about the basics very quickly. It's always good to get good experience feedback. But in more, if we discuss the technicalities, you identified the patterns, the basic ideas, the motifs, and then when did you decide to set it in 2021? Do you have a few concrete examples of changes in the depiction of characters or motifs? You transitioned from basically from the post-World War I period to now a post-pandemic world of the 21st century. Ooh, that's a lot of questions rolled into one. I think the first question we had was the viewpoint. And the viewpoint is that woman who's looking for her son and who's investigating. So it's really not a detective story, it's a thriller, because the closer she gets to truth, the closer the danger closes in. So that was already our standpoint. And then we had the references you were talking about. Of course, before we started writing, there was the question of fantasy or science fiction, the degree of science fiction we should have in there. And when we talk about getting your hands dirty, it was working on the idea of the double, or perhaps of insanity. In fact, our initial idea, which is no longer there, but our first radical idea was a woman who was possessed by another woman, a woman who disappeared, and she kind of takes over her body through another identity. And it was something we offered in our initial discussions with France Télévisions. So we worked with France Télévisions, with Stéphane, Frédéric, before you came aboard. It was really, how are we actually going to manage to find the right proportion of fantasy? So it doesn't appear in the teaser because maybe Stéphane will tell you more about that. But fantasy, the fantastic element is quite important. Maybe you'd like to pick up on that. Elsa started with the essential, of course, it's the viewpoint. In Maurice Leblanc's book and in the series in 1979, which I saw, I asked them not to watch it. I had some vague, distant memories of it, but in that she's not a heroine. She just, things that just fall upon her, things are inflicted to her. And so we had to work on a heroine who was on a quest with conflicts and struggles, and that was a viewpoint that changed compared to the book. And then the second point, in both the novel and the series, you already find out who the bad guy is and who is plotting, who's behind that complex plot. So, and we said, no, we can't do that. We can't we can't do that. So that was something, of course, that we used in developing the arcs and in writing that. And then as for the genre, we wanted to be... we talked more about horror, but this is more like, not horror, but more like a feeling of terror, a sensation of terror or anxiety, much more than horror. Everything happens on an island, so there's the kind of atmospheric genre there. There are some pretty strange things. The climate goes a little bit haywire. The weather changes and so on. But it was interesting to discuss this with Frédéric, because Frédéric read the pilot, and then he very quickly elicited an idea which he called the kind of stubborn strangeness. So things starting to emerge from there, because the fantastical element gave rise to an interesting idea which maybe you'll want to talk about. Yeah, just about how fantastical we wanted to be. I worked on Zone Blanche, which was a France 2 polar, which verged on fantasy, and that's kind of our identity as writers, as screenwriters. So initially we thought we would have this woman possessed, and that does appear in Leblanc's book and in this adaptation. But in fact, the standpoint was a bit too radical for Sophie at France Télévisions at the time. So we tried to agree on how much we'd push into that fantasy. So we wrote a pure thriller. And then we found this mix where we have this kind of young man, epileptic boy, who brings along the prophecy. It's a little bit like Minority Report with precogs who announce things that are going to happen in the future. So we found this kind of iconic character. It's kind of the village idiot, who actually becomes an ally of the main character. And so he encapsulates the kind of fantastical element. Maybe we could look at another clip, because I think... should we watch the first clip now? Yeah, well, it's probably more logical, because this will really plunge you into the heart of the story when the heroine reaches Sareg. It's an island. In fact, it's a made-up island. It was made up by Maurice Leblanc for his novel, and then we'll tell you later on what the reality of the island is. Because here we're talking about genres, we're talking about disturbing strangeness and so on. We've started the editing, but the principal photography just finished 2 days ago, so it's still very much work in progress. We had a meeting this morning about what remains to be done for the sound, for the SFX, and obviously it'll be much more in keeping with our idea. Okay, so why don't we watch the first clip, and then if Frédéric wants to comment that, why don't we do that afterwards? Let's watch it.
Venez visiter Sarek, baptisée l'île aux 30 cercueils. En 1700, une nuit de violente tempête, un navire s'est échoué sur les côtes avec à son bord tout son équipage. 30 marins ont péri cette nuit-là.
Bonjour, je désirais boire quelque chose, un café, un thé.
Vous avez du blanc?
On a un très bon vin de Loire.
Parfait.
On raconte que le capitaine a suivi le chant d'une morte qu'il appelait de la côte. Depuis cette nuit funeste, on associe les 30 récifs qui entourent l'île aux 30 cercueils des marins morts en mer.
Tenez.
Merci. Les gens croient encore à cette vieille histoire?
Ça fait bien des touristes. Des groupes de jeunes surtout, enfin de moins en moins. C'est la première fois que vous venez?
Depuis très longtemps, oui. Je suis née à Sarek.
Bon retour alors.
légende dit que le jour où la mort te reviendra, il y aura de nouveau 30 cercueils.
Faudrait pas que ce soit vous, la revenante. Pardon?
Putain, homme à la mer! Elle est de retour. Allez chercher Solène. Christine, tu vas bien? Qu'est-ce qui t'est arrivé? Alors comme ça, t'es revenu.
Frédéric, peut-être, je sais que c'est toujours très frustrant.
Perhaps I know it's pretty frustrating for a director when you see the first images in front of an audience and you haven't finished working on it. Now, maybe it'd be a good thing for you to take the floor after that excerpt and tell us in relation to what you saw, or what you would like to add to this, and maybe tell us what is left of the work you have to do, and see, in fact, how you got there. How did you actually contribute to this question, which was how to represent strangeness, how far can you go, what is a matter of writing, of directing. The floor is yours. Well, the first thing I wanted to say is that when we did the pilot in the first episode of the series, what I was interested in this from the outset, and that's pretty much like what I was doing before, is that we have, in fact, we're at the cusp of several genres there. And I find that interesting, actually. And I think in The Island of 30 Coffins, it's fantasy, it's crime, it's psychology, it's impure. It's a bit like the book, by the way, I have to point out. It's a strength, actually. It's this impurity of the series, which I think is very exciting for a director, because there, as I said, if we don't actually do something like that, it would be quite interesting to look at this as a challenge. That's a very fine thing as well in the text, that we could see it wasn't just a single harmony or line of music. Now, how do we make these different lines coexist? And the fact that we're there, because everything is saying, this is what make it possible to do this work. And combined genre is that basically we're arriving in an enclosed environment, an island, and for the viewer, we can say basically it's enclosed with its own rules. She has this preliminary moment where she basically loses her balance and falls into the water. She doesn't know if she's dead or not. And I found that it's important for me as well. It's quite seminal. In the first episode, you could ask yourself, you could wonder, is Christine dead or is she in the kingdom of the dead? There's this little play there by the scriptwriter that we were talking about this. The strangeness comes from the fact that it's very realistic, extremely realistic, but on the other hand, you see all kinds of signs that might create a slight doubt. And what was also inspiring, in addition to the references that Elsa and Florent can have, is it's a tradition of French fantasy cinema. It's very French thing. The casting, everything there, we're also in that tradition, with that kind of literary tradition, with Maupassant and one of those one of those iconic figures. Okay, now you've seen, okay. Everyone in the audience knows what a rough cut is. That needs to be reworked, but those are premises. It's a preliminary exposition of the character. Because she actually comes from that island. She thinks and she hadn't been back in 15, 20 years. So that's what's strange. It's going to a place that you know, that you have that déjà vu feeling, and you realize that a lot of things have changed. That's one of the things, in fact, of Christine's return to the island of Sark. Thank you. A question about the characters, in addition to the fantasy aspect. How did you work to make them contemporary, even though it's the beginning of women's emancipation after the Second World War, with women who had worked during the war. Okay, women have thankfully improved their lot since then. So how did you rework that to give them these characters a truth that smacks of today? I think I'll take that one. I'm not sure if we actually gave them today a truth of today, but other than adding this a feminine side, we also find in the masculine side of the characters. We don't just stop in sexual genders, because they're, in effect, Christine is a strong heroine, just like you could have had after the war, but we realized that the island is perhaps the central character, and because these characters belong to this island, there's no real need to make them modern, so to speak. I don't know if we really asked ourselves about whether they were modern, but these are characters, and on the contrary to the heroine, who's very modern, okay, they're wearing modern clothes at least, there's a big gap between the insulars, the people on the island, and what you've got is basically a timeless gallery of characters. They're very marked characters, by the way, but not in relation to their modernity or not. On the contrary, they've really got something, and they haven't stopped there, which is why this island seems... it looks as if it's subsumed the characters. It's a far more important character, in fact. What's a shame is that you can't see it in these extracts yet, because we haven't added the special effects yet. But this island, it's as if it was generating its own monsters with climate pitfalls, with the animals there. Everything's starting to break down, in fact. You can't get out of there. And so basically it's like a mousetrap for these characters, and apart from the heroine, the main character is the island, and they have a different kind of relationship. They're characters that are a bit timeless, I would say. Yes, it's true, as Frederick said, it's timeless. I'm coming here, I'm in a coma, I don't know, we were in her head, in some in between world of living and dead, and that gives us a timelessness to this island. And we didn't really ask ourselves whether it was modern or not, whereas with the start of the story, it starts in Paris as a doctor, where she's got a practice to manage. So all of a sudden things have to be done. After, compared to 68 to 79, she gets a text message, which wasn't possible at the time, and that instantly disappears. So we're asking about madness. Did she see something that didn't actually happen? That's where we're asking, we're between worlds, between reason and insanity. Is her investigation is just or fair? That's the kind of questions, basically. That's fantasy. And as you were saying, the double figure as well. You could talk about this more, which is always more present as well. Christine is the phantom, the ghost of somebody else. There's also something else. You were working in archetypes, fundamentally. And that's what's interesting. I feel like saying that the fact that she dives into the water, she's freeing herself of her modernity as she goes into another space. It's almost voluntary, but it's something that's done. It's timeless in that sense. And that's interesting because basically it's a series that works a lot on an archetypal material. As more that we advance, the more we work on things that are quite disconnected from what we know as modernity today. Yes, they're getting freed, actually, of things. Look, she's dressed in a fairly urban way. As soon as she dives into the water, she recovers her post-adolescent clothing. Basically, she changes shape. And people in the island, basically, it's what we did when we were in Wassant. In fact, people there are quite timeless in Ushant. You've got these old cars, they've kept them for 15 years, everyone's wearing the same kind of clothes, same bonnet. You don't feel that contemporaneous pressure isn't felt so much there. It feels like they're getting rid of very modern signs of modernity. In fact, there's this thing. You've got people who are basically regressing. It could be the heroine, it can be her husband, or the islanders themselves. They will also all go free themselves of their superego. I'm sorry to do my armchair psychiatry there, but basically they're being driven, and all of that comes out. That's something you can read into this story. Yeah, I pretty much agree. It's a psychoanalytic journey, and what's modern is the fact of emancipation compared to being actually under somebody else's control. But it is a journey in psychoanalysis, a journey of understanding the truth. It's a journey of the mythology, like in the deep. I'm based on something that I've discovered or that I'm going to carry on discovering by fighting. We found a door into modernity there with one character, a mythical character, Levosky. And there again, we went back with Elsa and Florent to look at a character. But I'm not going to spoil it, but we talked about this. Charles Burning is this character. It's a variation of modern maleness. And then there is a big difference from the novel, from the story, and from the series that was done before. And I think it's a character who's very ambivalent, quite modern in what's being narrated, a bit anti-conventional, non-conventional, and it might appeal to adolescents there because it's conscious. Just because you're an adolescent or a teenager, it doesn't mean that you may not be open to the planetary village and all kinds of things. And there was a decision made by Frederick in the way they were dressed and how you decided they would express themselves. They create that very interesting contrast. And we have a little opening into modernity there. Now, this is personal. I think that the modernity of this series is almost fortuitous because you've got the story of a woman becoming free in certain conditions, but the questions that we're asking here in this series, the question of parity of women, is strange enough, I find, Christine's journey is actually very modern. And I get the feeling that what makes it modern in this series is not all the external signs of modernity, I don't know, digital stuff or whatever. It's basically how a woman all of a sudden becomes more involved in her life. How does she do this, in fact? And I think the message at the end, without saying too much, is quite modern. I don't think there was a quest for modernity in your project, but despite everything, I find the theme of the film, what comes out, is actually quite modern. Now, I'll ask a question again to François. That cast, it's a very fine cast. It's a cinema cast with actors who work primarily in cinema, in film. Is it something that you wanted? Did it just happen? Was it a way of paying homage to Madeleine and Proust and have pointers to known and talented actors? Is it inherent in those characters as well, in that relation, that you decided altogether to have this cast? What made you think about this? I think it's all of it, basically. There again, we have an unprecedented situation. I turned up on this project, and I was lucky to find Virginie and Charles on it. And then everything just gets bigger in this project. Everything that you expressed so well, all four of you, I find that we tried, while we attempted to give to our series the most event-based approach to it. There's always an aspect of cast and casting in that kind of project, but being faithful to the subtext and find the best way of doing this to make this journey as effectively as possible, so everyone hits bottom before, in the hope of finding a better way. And the decision each time, it was really great. It was a very informed and open discussion about the cast. Really. And what really warmed us up was that desire to have a 10-hour journey with certain people. Really. And I really appreciate, and I was joking about it before, the Swiss diplomacy of Frederick in his decisions. Now, perhaps we can talk. You turned up, you started off with the pilot. It's shot on an island. We know that's never easy. I believe you shot in Ushant. It's still quite a wild island. It's not always easy to access, depending on the tides. And given the themes that you can get, because the island itself is an island of legend, where the inhabitants are very, very insular. And how do you turn up on an island like that with a project that has its own integrity and feel? And how long does it take how long did you spend actually shooting on the island? I believe you must have shot other things elsewhere. How did the production go? And the fact that you shot some parts of it on the island, did that help to add a touch of reality for the space and geography and this sort of thing? What do you think about this? I think for the project, and there I'm looking at Stéphane, he from the outset, I didn't know Southern Finistère. He was telling me about Ushant, and I said to Stéphane, and I texted him, in fact, when we were doing the scouting, I think we had written 2, I believe. In fact, it was in October. We spent 2-3 days with them to have some pre-scouting locations. It's a way that we managed to get to know each other, but it's actually rather unusual to go off with your producer, the two of you, in so far in advance. So we ended up in Ushant, and there's something that we said it's the westernmost island for France, and there again it's added a little bit of timelessness. It's very bare. I think it's 8 kilometers long. One side has been eroded by the wind, but on one side, it's almost, when you go on the western side, you're basically at the level of the water, and you get a feeling it's completely wild, natural, primitive. It's archetypal. I go back to this, and it's a very strong feeling. So the intuition we had, there are other islands available who are a bit more urban, civilized, with other codes. But for me, there was something that was quite virgin. So we said, okay, let's shoot 2 weeks. We had 12, 13 weeks of shooting. We'll shoot for 2 weeks there. We'll go and look on the mainland for other locations. You talked about tides, equipment. We didn't have much. But we didn't have much equipment with us in terms of machinery and lighting. So that was a bit of a bet there we took. And in fact, we were doing this on the island. The actors, when we start off with them, the team and the crew, they felt they were living something together. We went too far. We were in Crozon. We were not far from Brest. And looking for locations to find venues that went in line with this. So we spent 10, 11 weeks in Brittany, of which 2 in Ushant, with 4 spots in not too far from there, actually. And each time thinking that we had to believe it was this island. It was a fictitious island, basically, that could be a bit semanticized, so to speak. And I believe it's quite a strong thing in human and artistic terms to start off with this island and to say, okay, it was an aberration for some. A lot of people said, you're completely crazy. You're wasting your energy, yeah? You remember this? Yeah, well, that was part of the stakes involved. It was a non-negotiable. We had to organize the shooting around that because the writers had written a character in called Sarek, an island. We had to represent it. That was my intuition from the outset. That's why I said, okay, let's go off on an artistic journey. We've got to impregnate ourselves with this and make an early decision. And after that, we'll see what the constraints are. Now, we realized that, as Frederick explained, given the topography of the island and the hilly aspects, we could almost be in the peninsula of Crozon and other places that would match the decor quite well. But all the imagery shot there, horizons, dawns, arrivals, even the arrival. Actually, you have the port of Conquet right opposite. We could have shot it there, but I think it's something that made it very insular, being at the end of the world from the rest of the mainland, that you didn't feel anywhere else. And I think it's pretty good. You can feel it in the pictures. And then let me think about this as well. Perhaps we can show another extract, and we could position it for us. Or let's just show it. Yeah, let's see what happens. Would you like to tell us a bit about this sequence? Well, Christine basically finds this kid that she knew from before. And that's the first time you realize that this kid, you'll see why he has epileptic fits. We basically included his gift in this sort of ailment, but he sometimes sees things, what's going to happen. And what's the problem for Christine is that, firstly, he adds this idea that it's going to happen, which is quite disturbing for us as viewers, because you wonder what we're doing there, and that's where you start getting this idea of a dual character. So it's starting to be developed. At one point or another, Remy thinks she's called Emily, and I love this word, doppelganger. It's that idea, basically, that says that Christine is inhabited by strange and mysterious beings. Thank you. So, as we don't have that much time left, because afterwards, Anne Holmes, who's director of fiction at France Television, will be presenting the France Television lineup and what she expects from forthcoming fiction work or drama work. I want to ask you what made you really enthusiastic about this project. Is that it has this rather unusual DNA. What was the energy? What was the moment or the desire, the strongest time that made this project put so much of yourself in it? Which goes back to some of the questions we might ask ourselves about this. And in what way is this project important in its production, writing, development? Ladies first. I think I can summarize whatever you all felt. I think it was a happy experience. That doesn't always happen in fiction, because we can live a very long time with projects, with the channel, with the producers, the directors, and we all felt, in fact, the experience was very harmonious. We all were straight talkers. We've been known each other for 16 years. He was the first producer with whom I worked. And I, same thing. We set up a collective of scriptwriters 15 years ago. Frederic, we didn't know each other, but in fact, with France 2, from the outset, it was extremely fluid, with whom we always thought we were working in the same direction. So I've never had an experience, and I think the actors will say that, but other people can talk about this. It was really harmonious. It was a genuine group effort from the channel to the actors. Everyone worked together. Well, I was going to say the same thing. What was really interesting was that circulation of energy. Now, that's pretty rare. That's why I'm repeating it. It's an experience that I think is quite unprecedented in this career, and I've been in this job in 15 years. It was time. Yeah, well, when it works, it should be duplicated. You've got to work out why and try and continue doing this. Something else that's very enthusiastic for us. Thanks to the work, thanks to the heritage of all this, we were able to write very quickly. That had to do with the harmony we have, because we had this material that we could identify quickly, and it made it possible to produce the pilot quickly with Elsa and make a work that was popular, but also meted things. So basically, we're talking about psychoanalysis, doppelgangers, all these things there. So we're happy with the objects with this that can impact a broad audience, and while we have themes and ideas that are important for our writing, that made us very happy with that. Yeah, I agree with that. What I found particularly exciting in this project is that I think it has a project that has to be quite Romanesque. That's why when you're talking about all these these actors, in fact, who were there in cinema, basically what drove people is that there was a bet we made. I've been in Engrenage, where a much more naturalistic approach. Here, it's far more surreal, and we're getting free quite a lot of things to be daring, to try things out. It's a bit more archetypal and Romanesque at the same time, and that channeled our energy. Because we got the feeling we were going to a place where we hadn't been there, at least in the way we were used to, at least for me. I believe a lot of actors as well, a lot of scriptwriters as well. I'd seen Revenants, you've seen Zone Blanche. We'd already got involved in that kind of field, but all of a sudden, there was this energy, this belief, basically, that was quite exciting. Stefan, what I will remember, which for the producer is very exciting, it's the opportunity to do a very local work. Maurice Leblanc is part of our heritage, one of our French artists, yes, of course, but he did work elsewhere, but he really was in France and very local. It's an island. It's a channel that wanted to do make an event. I want to thank French television, the creators and producers, and we can see that it'll be very important, in fact, and it'll talk to the French authors, public, and we're talking about an audience that watches ordinary television, and basically this channel knows its audience very well. We know that, as we said, it'll be very interesting for events. And in addition to that, well, we're doing everything to make this go beyond that. Because the genre makes it possible, because the cast makes it possible, because everything that's in there. And that makes it an enthusiastic thing for me, because it brings things back to a very high level. And we know there's going to be huge competition. There are multiple steps. We're working for France Television for this. But there's this additional aspect. And I think that's very enthusiastic for me as a producer. Well, very pleasant to talk to people who are happy with a series project. You told your story. I see you shared everything. It's very pleasant.
Alors moi j'ai entendu le mot collectif.
So François, I heard collective, harmonious, psychoanalytic, fictional, Romanesque, local that can travel. What would you add? I don't know. I think all of that adds up and to create a kind of adventure in the positive sense. When you're not at the heart of the project, but slightly on the sidelines, it's always very pleasant to see that the technicians, the actors, the crew, we're all very rich, and all of that wealth of talent calls for more wealth of talent. And I would say that at this point in time, we're only halfway. There's still all of the narrative grammar that we need to find for the editing in the cutting room. As Frédéric was saying, there's also a sound identity, and there's the music identity. There'll be all the SFX. And I think there's nothing more rewarding than taking part in this collective work that will enrich and become richer and richer up to the last minute of post-production. And that's what yields the best shows. So thanks, everyone. Thank you, François. Many thanks to all of you. So I guess we're a little bit impatient. I suppose you don't have a broadcast date yet, and even if there was, you'd probably not tell us. But when do you think we can see that? 2021, 22? We're delivering the end product at the end of this year, so it'll be 2022, and then I really don't know. I don't know either. You're going to have someone in the know so you'll just need to ask her. Well, thanks, and now I think we can we have Anne Olmes online who will be telling us about the editorial state of play at France Télévisions for anyone interested. So many thanks to all of you, and so on your TV in 2022. Oh, Anne's here already. But we can't hear you. Well, you told me to be here at 4:30, so I came along at 4:30. Fantastic. The wonders of technology. So we've just had a very nice presentation, very pleasant presentation of L'Île aux 30 cercueils, but we have now learned that we're probably going to need to wait until 2022 because they need to finish it up. Many thanks, Anne, for taking the time to join us. And of course, we've the past year and a half have been pretty tough. Relationships between writers, producers, and broadcasters weren't that good because we didn't get to meet in various physical events. Would you be so kind as to tell us a little bit about your lineup, what you have in the pipeline, and also what you're looking for, to give a little bit of legibility to all of the professionals in the room? Sure. Could I just say hi to the team from the 30 Coffins, because I was there with you all the way. At least I was thinking very hard. So France Télévisions, of course, is now going to continue. We have 5 slots for fiction a week. One which I share with International Co-Productions, which is the Monday night slot. Let me start with this one. Can I go on? Yeah, we can hear you fine. And we can see you fine. This is working really well. So I'm talking about the Monday slot. The Monday slot is dedicated to major events. It doesn't mean that other shows or other feature-length films aren't interesting, but it's kind of our prestige slot. They're ambitious, they're high risk. That's where we put La Dernière Vague, which was our first science fiction, where we had La Garçonne, Laetitia, Le Mensonge, Voltaire, De Gaulle. So it really is a slot that reflects the creativity, although of course others reflect creativity, but in other ways. It may be the slot that L'Île aux 30 cercueils fits into, because you saw what the development was. So currently in production or in the writing phase, we have quite a number of shows like that. One about witches, one called Vortex, which is also sci-fi, where there are kind of little jumps through time. So innovative stuff on the Monday. We also have costume on a Monday. Costume is of course very expensive, so it's difficult to find funding, and it's not necessarily an editorial choice. It's just that it's very costly. I mean, it's a very down-to-earth reasons. How can we fund like long sagas with period costume? Especially since we need to have new fiction across 5 slots. So in our lineup for the show, we have L'Absente, produced by Sophie Léville. Ce que Pauline ne vous dit pas, a mini-series by Isabelle de Georges, Jean-David Lestrade and Rolov Tissot and Karim Waled directing. So a number of shows that are a little bit different from what one usually can watch on France Television. But there's always in that Monday slot there are a few available spaces because we constantly need to review that. And in fact, it's dedicated to miniseries. So basically, there's always room there because obviously when you have recurring seasons, you don't need to renew it immediately because it can just stay in that slot. But then with a miniseries, once you've done 6 times 52 minutes, and you say, okay, we're not doing a season 2, so it's over. Meaning that from one year to another, you constantly need to renew the screenwriters, the producers, and so on. So it's a good thing because but then we also have sort of period fiction and so on, and sort of short formats. And then on the Tuesday, we're on France 3, essentially a family audience. It's a very popular slot. It's where Marlowe used to be. That was a big hit. But it's the fundamentals. The kids don't have school on the Wednesday, so it's more like family-oriented comedy, and it's not always easy to do that. We add a little bit of crime into that, but a pretty light-hearted crime, prière d'enquêter, others. But it's more kind of investigations, mysteries. But it's essentially for a family audience. We have cops, judges, lawyers, and doctors, but the purpose of the Tuesday is to have family-oriented programs with shows or short TV films that are pretty light-hearted. So it might not always be clear for you because there are a lot of repeats. We do have kind of Saturday crime shows that we repeat on Tuesday. But in fact, very clearly, for instance, I mean, a lot of people are watching the football, so, you know, we just need to fill the slot. So in the season, it's just at particular times that we have repeats, but we're also looking for kind of unit comedies, which are hard to expand into shows, but it's essentially recurring characters that are in there. Wednesdays on France 2 is the one about sort of society, debates. We're going to have nervous breakdowns, online harassment, families, conjugal rape. It sounds really dreadful when you talk about it. Yeah, it's like the catalogue of human horrors, indeed. But that's the slot in which we discuss problems in society, including through our shows. Shows that need to respect, you saw La Faute à Rousseau, Le Prof de Philo, aborder, to talk about schools through philosophy classes, L'École de la Vie. So these are kind of really institutional shows. And then there'll be Le Code, which is a court drama. And there were a number of attempts, such as Accused, but so it'll be a court drama. And then there will be miniseries 2, but these miniseries will be essentially based on a social phenomenon. It's really social, broader social issues, a kind of reflection of today's world. So this debate, a slot, is something we also need because the world is a very fast-moving place. We talk about issues, and then a new issue pushes out the former one. Very fast-moving, so there's always room in there. And then society shows about social issues. We're thinking that in the post-COVID age, we maybe wouldn't go into the medical field because maybe people are a little bit fed up of seeing hospitals on TV. And there's a lot of competition anyway by TF1's medical shows, so we're not going to pit medical against medical. But we are thinking about it because, of course, there's development and photography and so on. So that would take a little bit of time. But we're thinking about shows that would not be crime, but that would be something else. We have L'amour presque parfait, which is being shot about 30-somethings in the age of social media. How do you find a boyfriend, a job, a flat? How do you move into adulthood in 6 times 52, more in the comedy style? We're also making inroads elsewhere to try to reflect young people, older people. But we are using that to try to rejuvenate the audience. So we stopped Nina. We shifted Alex Hugo elsewhere. So there's still a bit of room. We ordered season 2 of La Faute à Rousseau and season 2 of L'École de la Vie. Although the results weren't really spectacular, but we do know that it's part of our public service remit to talk about public service workers. But we are on the lookout for heroes, for civilians, so-called, that talk about the contemporary world. And then Friday on France 2, we've renewed all of our recurring shows. That's what the Friday slot is for, basically. Tropique criminel, Astrid et Raphaël, Le crime lui va si bien, César Wagner, Candice again. So it's true that that particular slot is a little bit saturated there because it's recurring shows that have just started and we can't actually cut them off now because everyone is saying and the producers are really happy. Because when there were recurring series that worked well in the olden days, we would order 4. But now we're kind of only having 2, otherwise we can not show anything new. And we don't want everything to become that in January every year you have César et Raphaël or whatever. So we're going to have some crime stories, sort of self-standing crime stories. On n'efface pas les souvenirs. So we're going to have a lot this year because last year we all had an issue with COVID, of course. And it was probably much better to have 20 days to shoot over a period of 20 days rather than embark on shows, on series where actors would be on or off, or the shooting would be on or off. So we had a lot more kind of film formats than we would have in a normal year. So the renewal will occur gradually over the past 2 years. We have stopped Sheriff and Cain. That went pretty quick. But apart from that, apart from 7 of these kind of self-enclosed films, but then of course, crime stories, we need meaning. We have... in Crime Tropique, it was better to go and shoot elsewhere than in metropolitan France. It's in our overseas territories. Astrid et Raphaël wanted to talk about disabilities, a new take on disabilities. When we pick a show, it always needs to have meaning and not just be entertainment. On the Saturday, we also have our recurring show. We have Meurtre à, Murders in. We stopped Mongeville et Magellan. We cut them off. It was working really well, but we cut them off because we needed to free up room for something else. For new recurring shows, new series. And you know how it is. When things work, you need to know how to pull the plug. When something is working, and some people have trouble with that, particularly the producers and the actors. So, you wanted to say something? No, go ahead, please. So, the problem for us with these recurring programs is that you need to pull the plug on something that's working, and that's never fun. and then we have a lot of a kind of regional crime stories. You know, focusing on French regions. It's more like dramas, legends, fairy tales. We're going to continue with Cassandre. It's not really an old show, but in terms of our recurring shows, we don't have that much left because this is now the end of Mongeville et Magellan. So I really didn't go into the finer details because it would be complicated, and it's probably not what I'm here for today, but it may all look really easy from outside, but there's always an angle. We always give an angle to a particular slot. And if I were to ask people to work on something, I think the real gaps that we have, the actual issue for me today would be the Wednesday slot, because no Alex Hugo, no 10%. It's not very glamorous, it lacks glamour, lacks humor. To try and kind of break this debate slot, we'd like to, and finding a show about social issues is difficult. So there are a few gaps there. There are a few gaps on the Monday too, and that doesn't mean that we don't want to have something under development or you know, being written. So it's the fine line between ordering too much and then not delivering, and ordering not enough, because when something stops, you have nothing else to replace it. Well, thanks a lot for this a pretty comprehensive overview. We don't have much time for our chat because there's another session after this. Maybe we could take perhaps just a couple of questions from the audience. Let me take my glasses off. I can see better, see the audience better. No questions, it would seem. So, in fact, what I'd like to do is perhaps ask a question. Because, of course, we know that creative work is a lengthy process. It needs to mature, to ripen, create desire, create imagination, make people dream, or so on. But if you had a couple of words in the projects that land on your desk, what do you expect in terms of, I don't know, colors, approaches, or you were talking about various issues and the various editorial angles and so on, because I suppose you probably have a lot of projects that land on your desk, and probably a lot of those you've turned down. But from time to time, you know, if people could get a couple of markers about the style or orientation that you would like to focus on, maybe, you know, it could help people to say, okay, so I would need to develop something that would fit into a particular slot, but what would the sort of writing style or flavor be? What kind of flavors would you expect for French fiction on France Télévisions? Listen, well, there are a number of things. We never get to see each other for a year, and half of the projects that were turned down were projects that already had the same flavor. But as we didn't pitch things to each other, as we didn't meet up, and that fiction needs a vibe, a kind of contact. And then after a while you have this kind of current or trend. So suddenly you get 10 shows about the same thing that land on your desk. And that didn't happen because we never got a chance to talk to each other. So that was a bit tough. What I see coming along, and I think where the gaps are light-hearted and fun shows. If you take stock of what we had like 10%, fais pas ci, fais pas ça, and we don't have the entertainment aspect of fiction, we don't have enough comedy. When the viewer council tells us about France Télévisions. They say, we like to think about the world's issues with you, but we also like to have fun when we watch. So I think it's something a bit more light-hearted is perhaps missing. But I'd say the world is a very dark place at the moment, and maybe that also is reflected in fiction. But there comes a time when you think, okay, we have no kind of solar characters there. We're a little bit lost on that light-hearted. Nothing kind of tangy or fizzy. And I think, well, I think everyone will have got the message. And the sun's shining in Fontainebleau, so I hope that might bring a little bit of light-heartedness for the better enjoyment of our audience in the projects you'll be developing. We do have a question. Thank you. Could I ask a little question about these light-hearted shows, comedy shows? Of course, great. But what about the eternal debate between the fact that very often these comedy shows lack a deeper message, and that's why they're not? You heard it? You heard the question? How can you be both light-hearted and talk about issues to last in primetime slot? Well, yeah, of course. It's the big issue. We're all looking for these little issues within the comedy. And then usually you do find them. But I'm wondering whether, well, we've not actually tried that, but with everything, all the stuff that people are watching on all of the streaming platforms, maybe people are now sufficiently in the habit of savoring of fiction rather than just gobbling it up. So maybe there could be fiction where it's just sort of pretty and fun, and we're told a story and we don't necessarily need to know who done it at the end. And fiction has changed. I think the risk-taking aspect is much less important than it was in the past, because everything, I mean, it works. When you have very powerful shows that work, you can really take risks on shows that are where you don't need to think, okay, well, if we don't have 5 million viewers, never mind. But you know, we can do that. I mean, we can afford to do that now. Well, it's pretty reassuring. We're now going to have to yield the stage to the next speakers, but many thanks, Anne, for your little lineup day by day, your kind of weekly lineup in terms of expectations and what you had in the pipeline for your various networks. Many thanks to the team of L'Île aux 30 Cercueils who really kindled our curiosity there and made us want to watch that as soon as possible. So enjoy the rest of the day, and thanks again, Anne, for joining us. Ciao, thanks.
Vous êtes prêts? et bonjour. Donc bienvenue à Anne Villot, directrice de la fiction de TF1, qui va...
Okay, you're going to present us the lineup of drama for the autumn, and of course, you of course can ask questions at the end of the session. The idea and prepared a presentation that she was going to, and I've got some questions, and then it's over to you. So hello, I'm delighted to be here in person and meet real people. That's great. I think it's one of the first times I can do this. So I'm delighted to be here to present to you the latest drama we've got from TF1 for 2021-2022. Autumn is particularly dense. You will see is highly diverse. I'm going to tell you all about it, but first of all, I wanted to show you the organization chart for, in fact, what we do in France. Around me, you've got Stéphane Viard, who's director of acquisitions. You've got 8 artistic advisors. Those are the names. Along with assistants and an alternate. And then you've got Emma Tobescat, who's an alternate, and she receives all the projects, all the scenarios, all the scripts that we get. So this drama team manages primetime drama from Monday to Thursday night, as well as our 2 daily soaps that are broadcast all year long. To develop the TF1 editorial line, they're looking at a strong ambition and a desire to create an event. As you know, the landscape has considerably changed. There's much more competition and a content offering that we've never seen before. It is extremely important for TF1, a historic broadcaster with many viewers that still has to acquire new ones every day to create, therefore, new events and stand out. And to do this, we have 4 pillars. Firstly, the creation of more increasingly premium miniseries, to which we attach more and more importance, and I'll show you with some examples later how. The creation of new series and new heroes. The most outstanding example is, of course, HPI. The creation of what we call inspiring unit products. Basically, we want to go into all kinds of genre and explore new territories. So, making our mini-series more premium, as I will explain with some examples, it's the desire to aim for difference, to stand out, in particular with ambitious writing, with, I don't know, complex characters or stories. They're far from being smoothly worked out, in which we can identify with, and also subjects that are extremely varied, that can go from very dark crimes to fantasy, and as we'll see with some examples, a strong production value, and our desire is to offer the best to our viewers, to have cinema at home, and in particular to say a lot of work on directing, lighting, music, even the image format, which is extremely important. And of course, you know us well for this, the great importance we attach to casting, 5-star casting, which come from different horizons and backgrounds, from film, from TV, from humor, from sometimes singers, to offer our viewers the best. I'd also say that miniseries are, for me, well, that's the absolute queen of the formats. It's, in fact, it's what matches most what our viewers are used to today, given this offering in content that's extraordinary. And in fact, the fact that we've got a story to tell over 3 or 4 evenings so that you can engage, but only over 3 or 4 evenings, that you can binge extremely easily, which equates to how people do things today at the moment, and it makes it exists. It makes it possible for characters to exist, stories to unfold with a lot of events. So some examples that are going to turn up, I hope, that are highly awaited. Une affaire française. You may have heard about this. The story of Gregory, a little boy from the previous century, that's still regularly talked about in the media. It's a very fine production by Chaîne Fédération, directed by Christophe Lamotte. A cast that's exceptional. Guillaume de Tontaquec, Laurent Cerné, Blandine Bellavoir, just to mention them, and the desire and the story to address it in a very sober manner without any bias. We're extremely proud of the result. I hope you'll appreciate it. In a different register, in Si Longue Nuit, Such a Long Night. This is the adaptation of a British format known as Criminal Justice, which is called The Night Of in the US. It's performed by Mathilde Seigné and Jean-Pierre Daroussin and the remarkable Sayed Alanik, who is the hero of the story. It's a story of this young man accused of a crime. After a very long night, there's everything there that points towards him, and he'll be defended by his lawyer, Mathilde Seigné, who will be facing off against Jean-Pierre Daroussin, who's the investigator into this, written by Mathilde Germain with a lot of talent. My Angel, Mon Ange. It's a UGC production. Again, it's a thriller. In fact, it's a whodunit with Marielle Robin, Patrick Chenet, and Marie Louberry. And it's a story of a woman whose daughter disappeared 8 years earlier. Everyone thinks she's dead. She's obsessed by her daughter, and she ends up spotting her from behind on a picture in the social networks, and she goes out looking for her. Produced by UGC, and Rebecca, another approach. It's the story of a woman cop and in fact she's married to Benjamin Violet, and she finds herself facing the return of a serial killer that she'd hunted for many years. We were very pleased with the work done by Didier Le Pêcheur, who did this mini-series with these people, mentioning just them, in fact. In fact, we're in a pretty dark, very addictive thriller in multiple episodes in a completely different genre. Les Combattantes, the women fighters, after the fantastic experiment with Le Bazar de la Charité, we wanted to start again with the same people, the same producer, Iris Boucher, director Alexandre Laurent, three actors, Julie Bonnard, Audrey Fleurot, and Camille Lowe, and we added Sophia Essiadi, and this time we got into a period, a turbulent period in history, which is the First World War as seen by women. We see the exceptional destiny of these four people, while we know that their husbands were on the front, and it's the women who took over the country. So we're following the story of a young nurse, a prostitute, a nun, and a businesswoman, so to speak, who took over her husband's business. So why did you use the same actors? And in fact, what I'd like to consider is the idea of using these heroines, not playing the same characters, but will find the same in other adventures over time, with this feeling of an anthology, practically, of women at key moments in history. Now, new series. Well, there's TV and fiction, and television was created to create series and make these rendezvous possible. That's absolutely fundamental, in fact. We saw this with HBI and with Balthazar and other things as well. It's still the case where we managed to make a deal with our viewers more than ever before, where we will meet up. And of course, we need strong, bold concepts that are differentiating. We attach a lot of importance to the way in which our characters will exist and create a difference in relation to our neighbors, and the way these stories will be told. And we also attach a lot of importance to, how can I put this, the magical appointments between, or meetings between, an actor and a character. It happens. It's rare, but when it does happen, it's fantastic. Now, obviously, it's the case with Audrey Fleurot, who met Organ Andro, Thomas Cisney with Balthazar, and Captain Marlowe with Corinne Maziero, or even Peter Falk in Colombo. Now, you see, there's that magic, and the viewer will, of course, feel this. And I didn't say this, but everything I've mentioned so far are things that are what we're looking for. Now, we're particularly looking for new series, new heroes in every genre, of course, in crimes, and of course, some examples to illustrate this. HPI. What we would particularly appeal to us is the intelligence of the concept and the originality of the concept that promised investigations that would be narrated in a different way, and the flamboyant character that we all fell in love with instantly. Another example is The Replacement, Le Remplaçant, where the producers came to see us with a very simple idea. What if Joey Starr played a French teacher? And that may strike you as surprising to begin with, but it emerges as practically as obvious. This actor loves wordplay, will be this irreverent, different kind of teacher with his own methods and his own personality, teach young school kids who sometimes may be losing their way. Another example, and there again, this is a pilot, it's The Devil's Leap, Le Saut du Diable. Here again, we're leaping into a very different genre. This is adventure. And again, what's interesting is to show that, of course, one of the foundations of our drama is this sort of like crime thing. But we can go into different themes. And we didn't have an adventure one. We're very pleased to have done this. And we hope to do more. Now, of course, an example for this is Balthazar, our famous medical examiner, who talks to the dead and has these investigations, and this year welcomes a new partner, Constance Labbé. And I can promise you a season full of surprises. Now, Les Unitaires, the unit ones, we do this. We're looking for this, perhaps not so much as the others. We're particularly demanding and selective. But it's a genre that we really like, with, again, the objective of instilling a strong emotion among our viewers with stories that are particularly varied, and also it makes it possible to address subjects at the heart of our contemporary concerns, societal issues, and some examples that were fine in the past. The day I burnt my heart, the time we talked about domestic violence, for example, or bullying. So here's an example. He is she, il et elle, that won an award that had it's a fiction about, a drama about gender dysphoria, where somebody who doesn't feel good in his or her body and feels profoundly to be a girl and has to say, in the end, to her parents, where Andrea Ferrer plays the heroine, and we'll see how her parents will help this individual with all the difficulties you can imagine in the pathway towards a transition. And of course, this subject was particularly interesting to us. It's a subject we've been talking about, an issue we've been addressing more and more. So it's highly evocative, and it talks about the difference between over and beyond gender dysphoria and differences in genders. And in a completely different register and on a completely different level, we produced a film that's called The Last Part, which has Franck Dubosc, Dumarchin, and another character that tells the story of a man who will help his father at the end of his days. So, made-for-TV films with some interesting things, with an awful lot of addiction, where we're talking about really a lot of very strong subjects. The subjects that are actually here going around society. Here's something called Service Volé, or Stolen Service. Something with, it's a story of Isabelle de Mongeau, the story of a tennis champion who was sexually aggressed, and as well as touché. This is the first thing we've done by Alexandre Lamy, who will tell us. It tells the story of three women with broken destinies, or at least damaged stories from the victims of domestic abuse, and who meet up, in fact, for a therapeutic fencing sessions. Here again, we've got some very entertaining drama in very different genre. Far From Home, Loin de Schéma, a domestic thriller in a very worrying, frightening house with Marc Lavoine and Marie Delterne. Noël à tous les étages, Christmas at every floor. It's a rom-com around Noël, Christmas. And The Weasel, Le Furet, a genuine rom-com with Claire Kane and Mathilde Bignon. So, as I was saying, this chapter covers different formats, but I like to make this stand out, in fact, to say just how much we're looking for new genre, how we like to explore new territories with the aim of appealing to a younger audience. As we all know, the younger audiences are extremely volatile, love drama, they watch a lot of it, and it's important for them to identify with themselves. In TF1, they can find drama where they can project. We often say you need stories that concern teenagers, young people, without excluding parents. And that's the problem. That's our ambition, not to have purely a teenage series, but to include families around the screen. And in particular, we do this with quite strong dramas and genre fictions. For example, Plan B, that we broadcast with success. Plan B, I'm sorry, that was broadcast in the spring. I think we've got our first new adventure, if we don't mind, Josephine Gardin-Agel, who snaps her fingers with her special powers. That's a little foray into fantasy. It's a story of a mother ready to do anything to save her daughter and can actually go back in time to do this. In another fantasy genre, we're very proud to welcome Luan in a mini-series that tells a story of a young psychologist, Loan is, who will have to deal with a 6-year-old little boy who has visions that may help or interest the police in solving crimes. And mensonge, lies, that's something that we could call this a woman theory with Arnaud Ducré and Laurie Florent, who it's a story of a woman who accuses a man who seems absolutely perfect of rape. Now, in a very different genre, we're very proud of launching the shoot of Syndrome E. It's the adaptation of Frank Tillier's novel. It's the first to have Charcot and Lucy investigating to resolve or to solve a very dark case in the scientific register and in the field of brain neurosurgical experimentation. So we've got somebody acting in the role of Commandant Charcot. So here is a teaser. You ready? Can't you see I'm trying to grow here? Yeah, we're trying to help you do it. You're always on my case. Now, have a look. Do you think she's really happy there? I met Bea's boyfriend. We don't know where she is. It looks like she's run away. Okay, it's easy, but she's choosing her boyfriends. If you hadn't been such a useless father, this wouldn't have happened. Liars, you can't imagine the number of women ready to kill for a date with this guy. You're fantastic. I woke up naked in my bed. I know something happened to me. It was consensual. I can prove it. I can assure you. It won't be easy. We had a kiss. We laid down together. And we made love. She was unconscious. But I asked him in, but that doesn't make me into a liar. The last part. It's Mum. Hello, how are you? Your dad has decided to die. The doctors want him to help him do this. There's a law that makes this possible. Yeah, let's not talk about anything. Fuck off. Okay, I'd like to spend some more time with... I want Arthur to know who he was. No, I'm thinking about you. No, only your father counts. The police found the body of a woman. My husband had a relationship with her. You don't ask any questions to your husband. How long? Not for long. This evening? Last night? I just don't know. You don't know. What do you think you should do? He must have made some mistakes. We'll get him. What did I do? Tell me. It looks like a sexual assault that went wrong. What's your name? We're looking for a knife. It's a kitchen knife. 8-centimeter long blade, approximately. You're being accused of the murder and rape of this person. I'm not what you think I am. So he tells us his story. I tell us I'm not going to tell a story. I want to tell the truth. We don't give a damn about the truth. If you don't get that right now, you can forget the next 20 years of your life. I took my revenge. I took my revenge on their children. I strangled the child and I threw him into the river. My revenge is done. There are two clans. There are those who are for La Roche, who are against Christine. Where did you go? What actually happened? What's the problem? Who actually told everybody? 36 years of mystery.
On attaque.
Shall we go? Wow. Pretty full lineup. So I do have a couple of questions, and then I'm sure people in the room will have some too. I had some very sort of hands-on questions for you for the producers and screenwriters who haven't worked for TF1 yet. What was the process for a project when it lands on your desk? Who did they get in touch with? And then in your fiction department, how does it fare? Well, it's pretty simple, really. What you need to bear in mind is that we read every project we receive. Of course, if there's already an option by a producer on it. And if that's the case, the fiction team, the actual fiction team, the art directors in the team read the projects. We don't outsource that. So you send it to Emma, to lovely Emma, whose pic you saw, or any art advisor, or to me, but basically the project always reaches the same place, which is basically our reading committee. We get together once a week. So we have the conseil artistique, the art advisors, and me, and we pitch the projects that we spread out kind of randomly. So they're pitched, and then we discuss them. And then, of course, when something really stands out for us, we ask for more information. We have a chat with the producer or producers and writers. And then if we're convinced, so on some occasions we ask for perhaps some additional documentations, or we may be uncertain for one reason or another. And then when we decide to go into that, we draft a writing contract, and then the project is co-developed with us. We read and debate the various steps in the writing, in fact all of the steps of the writing, until everyone's happy with the results, and then we move on to production. And in terms of development phase, what makes you sign? We sign for a development, but we don't actually ask for a formal 20-page document that says with such or such a precise point. I think things come quite naturally when we're talking about, say, a feature-length piece. We'll sign when we receive the synopsis for a show, for a series on some sort of Bible with a description of the concept, the characters, maybe a description of a couple of arcs, and the synopsis of the pilot, and for a mini-series, concept, arc, characters, and so on. But to be honest, there's no fixed policy, but sometimes we'll sign on the script that already with dialogue, but that's not really the idea. The idea is to write things together. So how many do you develop and how many do you produce? We have a pipeline of around 70 to 80 evening slots for new fiction a year. So I'd say we always have about 50 projects under development, and we receive between 800 and 1,000 projects a year. I have a question about TF1's editorial line. We saw a lot of adaptations recently, and a highly successful original creation. How do you feel about the coming year? To be honest, sometimes for these adaptations, maybe there's been more of a focus on that, but it also depends on how things are organized. But so yes, there are adaptations, but there's a lot of original creation. In terms of volumes, I would say that almost all of our shows, all of our historical shows, apart from Sam, are original creations. That we have a very rich lineup. You saw this year La Promesse, Une Affaire Française, Munch, Balthazar, and so on. So original creation is really at the heart of what we do. However, we also have a pretty free position about adaptations. One of the reasons is that producers come along and show us some good projects. And if we like them, it's hard to resist. And then the second thing is that there are a lot of works that would not have been discovered by the general public if they'd not been adapted on a major network such as TF1. I'm thinking about Le Bracelet Rouge, because the Catalan version obviously didn't really stand a chance of ending up on a big network primetime. And then screenwriters and producers are well aware of this. Adaptation is creation itself. It's not just cut and paste or cutting and pasting the dialogue. It's a real job sometimes. There are whole panes of the story that are done away with. Whole panes are added. You invent new characters. You imagine other arcs that are not in the original. That's what I could answer for that. And then in terms of collaboration with producers and writers, are you also open to young talent? Do you actually scout talent? Do you have a kind of talent intelligence department? I'd say that's very important, all the more so that initially my first job is a screenwriter, and without a good script, without good screenwriters, there are no good projects. And I'd say that today more than ever, with the plethora of the offering, the plethoric offering of content, we really need good writers. And every day we think, okay, such and such a product would take a really good screenwriter. So yes, we're always on the lookout for new talent. We scout new talent, often in a partnership with schools, FEMIS or CEA, which are the two main ones. And then I didn't talk about it, but we do have our 2 daily shows, which are in fact true breeding grounds for talents, and particularly for screenwriters. A lot of young screenwriters and directors and talent, actors, work for these daily shows and then end up writing for primetime TV. Because writing a fiction is very often teamwork. And I think that what's interesting is bringing together a confirmed writer who then works with, say, a writing room of more junior writers in a kind of a workshop format. You talked about a 5-star cast. Does that leave any room for new talent, new acting talent? Oh yes, to be honest, yeah, quite frankly, yes. Look at my daily, our daily show where you have Clément Rémiens, who emerged from that. And look at this year's lineup. Kim Higelin, who is a revelation. Fugueuse with Romain Joly, who is a true revelation. Or Saïd Al-Alami. At TF1, we are very keen to bring out and grow new talent. And there's plenty of room for that. Are you working at all on issues of diversity, which have become crucial? Absolutely. A depiction, a truthful depiction of society, I'd say, as a mass media outlet is crucial. And I think the representation of society needs to be a representation of the full diversity of our society. And we were actually given, there was a lot of kudos given for, of course, gender diversity, diversity of origins or social backgrounds. And yes, indeed, Elisabeth Moreno, for instance, visited the set of Ici on commence, and she said, well done, you have a good representation of diversity. But however, I'm not naive. I know that a lot remains to be done, both in front of the camera and behind the camera. Are there any initiatives that you're currently underway or that you're thinking about? Yeah, we're working on it, but it's also very much it needs to emerge as part of a partnership with producers. But I think it's really our interest to continue working on representing diversity. There's always a question about how long does it take to answer. So I hope the people who are in the room and who already work with TF1, but basically our turnaround time, we try to keep it quick, so it may feel long for you, but for us it's not. We try to take less than 3 months to answer when we're sent a project. And sorry, let me complete that. And in the development phase, and I think people acknowledge that, the feedback that we send after reading is very short, a week, a couple of weeks. And Estelle Boutier, who's in the room, is nodding, so she's confirming that. So obviously the audiovisual landscape is moving very fast. It moved even faster with the COVID crisis. Have your editorial lines shifted at all? Has your target shifted? The type of project that you're keen to co-produce, how you're reacting to the online platforms? Things are changing for them too. Look at Netflix with Lupin. Is that triggering anything? Well, yeah, a crisis such as the one that we experienced and are still experiencing now is important. I'd say that first, there is a very deep belief that linear broadcast television still has a bright future. Look at the amazing ratings for especially TF1, but all of the other networks too. TV, good old-fashioned TV, is a place that families, households turn towards. Fantastic ratings. It's also a very inclusive place where people can get together, and particularly through fiction. So, of course, it led us to think a lot about the fact that fiction is also the manner in which you envision the world and society and evolutions. And I believe that the screenwriters in this room will probably confirm, maybe we won't write stories in the way we used to, because we went through a phase of greater uncertainty, which will probably be reflected in screenplays tomorrow. And there's a need, of course, to rebuild tomorrow. As for the emergence of online platforms and a very tough competitive landscape, I would say that in a sense it was beneficial for us more than everything else, because it really pushed us to challenge ourselves, to change our editorial line, and I hope that the pictures I just showed you confirm that. Are you keeping an eye on the international performance of TF1 shows? Whether they're exported, is that important to you? Of course it is. We always keep an eye on them, and we're always very proud when the fiction that we broadcast then has an international destiny. On Netflix, for instance, L'Amante, for instance, or Le Bazar de la Charité, crossed the ocean, oceans and borders, and it makes me personally very happy. So I don't know if the producer's in the room, but I don't think he is. But you know, Stephen King saw Lamont and he tweeted about it, so we were really proud. And I think it's important. We don't actually make fiction for the foreign market. We really have a target audience that is essentially French, and we're unique in that. But we are delighted when our fiction crosses borders. So, okay, back to Netflix. Le Bazar de la Charité. Was there a collaboration? There was a collaboration with them. Do you think co-production or partnerships are viable models for the future? There's no set rule. We can do that when the project calls for it, and when editorially and financially it's beneficial to all. As for Le Bazar de la Charité, it was a very virtuous circle, because it was a manner for us to shine light on French creation all over the world, to show our talent, our ability to have very large productions, and it also allowed Netflix to leverage French know-how. Are there any collaborations, equivalent collaborations in future projects? Ooh, like, say no more. I will say no more. In terms of your expectations, projects, what would you like to see land on your desk? What would you like to see? What would you like to ask all of these people to write and produce for you? I'd say go ahead, send them in, keep them coming, and amaze us. Everything I've just said is true. But at the same time, we do like to be challenged and taken down roads that we didn't expect to. So there are a couple of projects. There's one that comes to mind there where the producer over lunch said, let me tell you this, but it's probably definitely not for you. It's more of a Netflix story. And I said, oh, wow, yes, I am interested. And it went into the development phase. So don't try to restrict yourself in what you believe TF1 wants. Try and amaze us in all of the various genres and styles that I evoked. And I think what would always be crucial for us is that whatever the genre, whatever the manner in which, how far you push things, it really needs to be character-based. We need to have likable characters, and we can follow them around the world, and characters to whom viewers can identify. And TF1 is the channel of positive vibes and also positive emotions, but we're there to make people laugh and cry and shudder. You can't be unscathed, come out unscathed after watching one of our fictions. Any questions from the room? Thanks. I'm one of the producers of the web series Résistance. We got the Audience Award at the Luchon Festival, and we're talking about the resistance in Normandy with a humorous angle. What's the percentage of... how do you look at web fiction to turn it into TV fiction? We're not really into online web fiction because our ecosystem doesn't really allow for that. However, we are always looking for projects that can have another fate than TF1. They can go elsewhere within the group. So, do you think a web production could end up on TV? Well, yeah. I mean, I don't have a percentage to give you, but if we're convinced by the project and we want to go there, we will do. Hi. My question was about... I saw that it was like a merger between TF1 and M6. Does that have an impact on on your job within TF1? Is it going to open create new roads, cooperations with M6. I think the bosses are the ones who are in a better position to answer that. What I can say is that creation, or at least on TF1 and probably on M6 too, has a bright future, but I can't say anymore. Hi, I wanted to know for international co-productions that are involved in, is your department in charge? It's Sophie Levaux's department. She's Director of Acquisitions and International Co-Productions. You were talking about diversity and inclusion earlier on. What's your positioning in terms of quotas of female directors? Have you got quantitative plans? I would say that naturally a lot remains to be done, particularly for female writers and directors of fiction. But thanks to our daily shows, we're having larger numbers of female directors, and there are also incentives on our primetime slots. La Promesse, more than 8 million viewers. Laure Butler, who is a female director, who's also directing Mensonge alongside Stéphanie Murat, so we do pay attention to that. I'm hogging the mic here for another question. In terms of digital offerings of fiction, does that change what you're looking for, or are you still looking for linear stuff? Yeah, essentially linear for broadcast. Well, I think that's it. Hello. In the following 18 months, are there any projects under development for sister channels, TFX and TF1 série film? Is anything under development for these? Well, there's a project currently being filmed called Cisbro. It's a short fiction format with 5 housemates who are in the flat and talk about friendship and love, and it's pretty funny. Anything to add? No, not really. Enjoy the festival. I think we have a pretty clear vision of TF1 next year. So thanks, and see you soon.